The day my boss told me I wasn't management material was the same day he accidentally signed the death certificate for his own career. I didn't know it in that exact moment, of course. Back then, I was just a tired 47-year-old engineer standing under fluorescent lights, holding a laser pointer and pretending that 12 years of my life still meant something. Now, sitting in a quiet office 3 states away with a badge that says Senior Systems Architect and a view of actual daylight, it's easy to see the pattern. But that afternoon, all I had was the sound of a room going quiet and a sentence that cut cleaner than any knife. "You're not management material, Bob." We were in Conference Room B, the coldest room in Sentinel Defense Technologies. I was in the middle of my quarterly systems presentation, one of those dense, boring slide decks that actually determined whether our network stayed compliant with Department of Defense standards. I just clicked to a slide showing the impact of our last 6 months of work. Efficiency up, costs down, protocols modernized. I remember feeling a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind you get after a string of 2 a.m. maintenance windows where nobody thanks you but at least nothing blew up. Then Chad Wellington opened his mouth. He leaned back in his leather chair, hands folded across his chest like he was about to deliver some profound leadership insight. In that flat, casual voice he used when he wanted to sound in control, he said he didn't think I was management material. He didn't even wait for my slide to finish animating. He just dropped the line right there in front of everyone. The room went dead still. On the far side of the table, Colonel Sarah Hayes, our Department of Defense Contracts manager, almost choked on her coffee. She covered it well, cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. She wasn't just surprised by what he said. She was offended on my behalf, which somehow hurt more. Next to her sat Ashley, Chad's 20-something niece who'd been gifted a marketing coordinator job, like it was a party favor. She pressed her lips together to hide a smirk, the way people do when they've just watched someone slip on ice but don't want to look like a bad person. Nobody said a word. Nobody defended me. It was like the air itself had decided to step back and watch. I kept my hand steady on the laser pointer. My face didn't move. 12 years in that place had taught me how to freeze everything above the shoulders when someone said something stupid. "Thank you," I heard myself say, calmly, like we were just discussing printer paper. Inside, something cracked. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot and fast. This felt like something heavy shifting after sitting in one place for too long. A support beam finally giving way. I'd spent 8 years in the Navy babysitting Unix servers and Oracle databases on destroyers. Another 12 years at Sentinel keeping classified networks alive while everyone else rotated through leadership programs and buzzword seminars. Every time a server collapsed or a security patch conflicted with some ancient piece of software buried in our infrastructure, they called me. But apparently I wasn't management material. Chad didn't pause to see what that did to me. He just clicked his remote and threw his own slide deck up. Glossy animations, fancy icons, the kind of presentation you see in business school commercials. He started talking about AI-driven automation strategies and streamlined overhead like he'd invented them last night. Somewhere in that speech, he mentioned transitioning Bob's legacy systems team to this brave new model. He said he'd personally spearhead the initiative with Ashley. I remember Colonel Hayes' grip tightening around her pen. I remember thinking that if this were a destroyer, someone would have yanked him off the bridge. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I just walked over to the small black box mounted on the wall, powered down the projector, and gathered my notes like the meeting was over for me, which, in a way, it was. As I walked out of that room, no one called my name. I passed the backs of heads I'd seen across countless late-night war rooms. People whose careers had been quietly saved by long weekends I'd never been compensated for. Nobody looked up. The silence wasn't angry or grateful. It was worse. It was indifferent. In the hallway, the air felt thicker. I could feel my feet moving, but my brain was somewhere else, replaying that sentence over and over. Not management material. The hell did that even mean? That I didn't talk enough in buzzwords? That I fixed problems instead of presenting them on 7-color charts? I walked past the engineering pod, the little cluster of desks where my team lived under fluorescent lights and ticket queues. Jenkins was hunched over his monitor, staring at a VPN log with that squint you get when you're trying to remember which contractor has which access level. I'd taught him how to set up those tunnels back when he still mixed up subnet and subway. Next to him, Rodriguez sat with his headphones half off, eyes darting between a terminal window and a background check form. I'd walked him through the security clearance process myself, telling him which questions to answer plainly and which ones to explain in detail so some bored investigator wouldn't flag him for nothing. Taylor, fresh out of the Navy, stood by the whiteboard tracing network diagrams with a dry erase marker, lips moving as he translated military communications training into civilian network management. I'd spent hours off the clock helping him turn field experience into something HR would accept. They all glanced up when I passed by. None of them said anything, but I saw concern flicker behind their eyes. In the military, you don't always talk about what's wrong. You just learn to read the room. And in that moment, they could read me clearly. Something had shifted. I kept walking. The server room hummed as I passed. An ugly little closet of racks and cables and blinking lights that had seen more of me at 3 in the morning than my own bed some years. Those Cisco routers I'd configured carried classified traffic for branches that would never know my name. They didn't care who designed them as long as they worked. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and microwaved leftovers. Someone had spilled grounds all over the counter and left them there. Dark specks like confetti from a party nobody cleaned up after. It struck me that this was the perfect metaphor for how the company saw me. Use the machine, ignore the mess, repeat. Back at my desk, I sat down slowly. The cheap office chair creaked, like it was protesting another day of duty. My monitor blinked with new emails. Slack pings cluttered the corner of my screen. For once, I didn't click anything. Instead, I reached for the top drawer on my right. Buried under years of random junk, spare cables, a screwdriver, a yellowed Navy photo Emma had drawn on when she was 5. There was a crisp folder I hadn't touched in over a decade. My original employment contract. I pulled it out and flipped through, the way a man might check an old manual to confirm he hadn't imagined a safety warning. The pages smelled faintly like paper that had been kept too long in dry air. Legal language blurred together until I hit the section I'd been vaguely aware of but never really used. Right there, in black and white, was a clause about working hours and obligations. It said I wasn't required to answer calls, messages, or emails outside posted business hours unless there was a specific, declared critical system failure or contractual emergency. It had always been there. I just never acted like it was real. For 12 years, I'd behaved as if the company owned my life 24 hours a day. I'd answered every late-night message, taken every weekend quick call, logged in from family dinners, pulled over at gas stations to restart authentication servers on my phone. I'd been the human patch on a broken process. That clause sat there staring back at me, simple and clean. No emotion, no drama, just a rule I'd agreed to, and they had too. I took out my phone, snapped a clear picture of that paragraph, and saved it to a private folder. Then I renamed the folder in a way only I would appreciate: insurance. As I slid the contract back into the drawer, something settled inside my chest. It wasn't joy and it wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was more like the feeling you get after shutting down a machine that's been grinding and overheating for hours. That low, unfamiliar quiet. I glanced at the clock on my monitor. 5:58 p.m. Normally, that was the time my stomach tightened and I mentally prepared for the second shift. The invisible one that started after everyone else went home. The server alerts. The last minute can you just emails. The panic calls from someone who'd ignored my documentation all day. This time I watched the minutes tick by. At exactly 6 p.m., I closed my laptop. No dramatic gesture. No heavy sigh. I just pressed it shut like I was sealing a coffin, smooth and final. For 12 years, I'd been the one who stayed late, who logged back in, who said, "Sure, I can handle that tonight." That evening, I picked up my jacket instead. I slid my badge into my pocket, not clipped to my belt like usual. It felt different there, like it belonged to someone else. I stood up, turned off my monitor, and let the office noise fade behind me. As I waited for the elevator, I pulled out my phone again. This time, I opened my settings and turned on Do Not Disturb. I set it from 6:01 p.m. to 7:59 a.m. every day. I scrolled through my contacts and added exactly one exception. My ex-wife, Sarah, for Emma. Everyone else? They could wait until morning, or figure it out without me. The elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside and watched the floor numbers drop. For the first time since joining Sentinel, I was leaving on time without the familiar guilt chewing at me. It felt wrong, like walking out of the house without my wedding ring the first morning after the divorce. But under that wrong, there was a strange, clean clarity. By the time I reached the parking garage, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. I wasn't going to touch a single system out of spite. I was simply going to do exactly what I was paid to do, within the hours they paid me for, and nothing more. If the backbone of the company was going to stop bending, then people would finally see what it had been holding up. I climbed into my aging F-150, turned the key, and sat there with the engine rumbling softly around me. I didn't curse. I didn't yell. My hands rested steady on the steering wheel. In the dim light of the garage, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The graying hair at my temples, the lines carved between my brows by 1,000 late-night alerts. Not management material, I repeated quietly, just to hear how ridiculous it sounded when no one else was around. If they truly believed that, I decided as I pulled out of the space, then they didn't deserve the way I'd been managing their crisis for 12 years. I drove home under a sky that was starting to shift from bright blue to the washed-out colors of early evening. Somewhere back in that building, emails were already piling up and systems were already complaining. For the first time, I wasn't rushing to fix any of it. I just kept driving. By Saturday morning, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, just unfamiliar, like walking into your own house after moving all the furniture out. I woke up later than I had in years, sunlight already leaking through the blinds. No alarms. No server alerts buzzing like angry bees. No Slack messages demanding explanations for problems I hadn't caused. For the first time in a long time, the world wasn't asking anything from me. I made pancakes. Bad ones, the first batch burnt, the second undercooked, the third finally edible. I fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. I threw out a stack of old printouts from last year's compliance review that I had carried home thinking I'd look at them over the weekend. I never should have been looking at them in the first place. Around 10:30 a.m., my phone lit up from across the counter. 1 missed call, Chad. 2 missed calls. Unknown number. Probably Ashley. 3 voicemails. All marked urgent. I didn't listen to a single one. I deleted Slack from my phone. I don't know why I didn't do that sooner. Maybe because part of me always believed things would get better if I just worked harder, fixed enough problems, covered enough gaps. But that morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a plate of pancakes and a half-broken faucet part, one still hadn't figured out how to reassemble. I realized something. It was never a workload problem. It was a respect problem. Priority problem, a leadership problem. I took a pen and tore a sheet off an old legal pad. On the top, in block letters, I wrote, "Things I don't do after 6 p.m. anymore." Then I started listing. And no restarting authentication servers from my truck at a gas station. And no untangling router configs during my daughter's school nights. And no explaining basic security protocols to people who don't want to learn. And no staying until 9 p.m. because someone scheduled a quick meeting late. And no fixing presentations Chad messed up. And no rewriting documentation because he said it looked too technical. No being the invisible safety net keeping incompetent people from hitting the ground. By the time I finished, I felt lighter. Like I'd taken off a 50-pound vest I'd been wearing for so long I forgot how heavy it was. Sunday came and went quietly. I barbecued on the patio. Emma called in the evening, telling me about a science project she was excited about. I didn't check my email. I didn't touch my laptop. And most shocking of all, the world didn't end because I wasn't monitoring it. But Monday morning, the silence broke. Not in my life. In the office. The moment I stepped into the building, I could feel it. That stiff, tight electric tension that hits right before a storm. People whispered in hushed tones. Screens flashed red login errors. Doors to meeting rooms stood open, as if someone had rushed out mid-sentence. Someone from accounting walked by holding a stack of papers and muttering, "Why is the payment system bouncing vendor transfers?" Another engineer stared at his monitor like it had confessed a terrible secret. I made myself a cup of burnt breakroom coffee and strolled to my desk. That's when the Slack messages started popping up on my screen faster than raindrops on a windshield. At Bob, can you send the security briefing slides for the operations sync? At Bob, where's the updated agenda template? At Bob, we can't locate the payment authorization key for Data Shield systems. Did you move it? At Bob, urgent. Hosting provider threatened suspension. Need your input ASAP. My status was green. I was technically online. They assumed that meant I was theirs again. I ignored them, every single one. At 8:47 a.m., the weekly operations sync collapsed in real time. No slides, no meeting link, no updated metrics. Just confused faces and a shared drive folder last updated 3 years ago. The one I'd created myself and maintained alone because no one else cared. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my awful coffee, and opened a cybersecurity journal article. Not out of spite, but because, for once, I had the time. A few minutes later, Ashley appeared beside my cubicle like a lost tourist. She wore that nervous smile she always used when she wanted something but didn't know how to ask for it. She said, "So, random question. Where do we keep the client authorization forms for new contracts? I think I have everything for the Air Force project except one piece." I looked up from my screen and said, "Final authorizations are locked until security clearances update." She blinked. "Right. So, where do I update those?" "You don't," I said. She stared at me, confused. "They require TS/SCI clearance and DoD certification." "Oh, so that's you?" I shrugged. "I'm off that project. Chad reassigned it last week." Her face went pale like someone had pulled the power cord from her brain. She mumbled something that might have been "cool, thanks," and backed away so fast she almost bumped into a filing cabinet. At 10:15 a.m., the next domino fell. The payment to Data Shield, our encrypted storage provider, had bounced. Not failed. Bounced. The system rejected it outright because the authorization formula wasn't entered correctly. They couldn't figure out why. I did, because the formula only existed in my head. 3 years ago, our old ERP system struggled with the character limits in the payment forms. I created a workaround involving a variable hash, the vendor ID, and a rotating security key. I verbally explained it to leadership twice. They called it too technical. So I stopped explaining. From the corner of my eye, I saw a junior engineer trying to unlock a secure documentation folder protected by two-factor authentication tied to DoD clearance syncing. I had set that system up. It wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, keeping unauthorized users out. By 11:30 a.m., Paul Stevens, a solid guy, former Air Force, approached my desk holding a folder like it was a live grenade. He whispered, "We've got a call with the Pentagon auditors this afternoon. Do you know if legal reviewed the compliance documentation?" I didn't even look up. "Nope." He nodded slowly. "Do you know where it might be?" "Somewhere between Chad's job description," I said, turning toward him, "and not my department anymore." Paul didn't argue. Military guys know when a chain of command is broken beyond repair. He gave me a tight nod, the kind that means both respect and resignation, and walked away. The ground wasn't shaking anymore. It was splitting open. By noon, the office felt like a sinking submarine. Phones buzzing, people arguing, alerts flashing. Someone in the business development team was apparently crying in the supply closet because a printer certificate error locked her out of her entire project folder. I watched it happen around me, not out of cruelty, but with the detached clarity of a man who'd spent 12 years patching holes no one else saw. And for the first time, I understood something deep in my bones. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped being the plug holding the entire dam together. At 2:13 p.m., the email that changed everything landed in my inbox. Subject: Final security approval required, urgent. It was from Colonel Hayes. Direct, polite, deadly. She wrote that the Department of Defense needed my digital signature on the updated protocols before Friday at 1700 hours. Not the team. Not the department. Me. By name. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my personal Gmail and renamed the subject line. For records, timeline evidence. A breadcrumb in case someone tried to rewrite history later. 15 minutes passed before Chad finally stormed into my cubicle, sweat beading at his temples, clutching his phone like it had personally betrayed him. He said, trying to sound calm, "Quick ask, Bob. Did you get Colonel Hayes' message? She needs your signature. Should only take a few minutes." I looked at him steadily and said, "I'm off that workflow." He blinked. "Well, yeah, but legally you're still the designated signatory." "Correct. So, could you just give it a quick once-over? Just this one time?" I lifted my hand, not angry, just final. "My workday ends at 6. You'll get what you get before then." He swallowed hard, nodded like a man who'd just been told his parachute was decorative, and backed away. I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I opened my calendar and created a new event for the next morning. Title, Oral Health, Personal Appointment. Duration, 3 hours. Notes, do not schedule over. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it necessary? Absolutely. Just before closing time, Colonel Hayes emailed me again, this time privately. She didn't pressure me, didn't demand a timeline. She simply wrote, "Military appreciates clarity." I replied with one sentence. Documentation reviewed and noted. Timeline pending operational resolution. It was the cleanest way I could say, I'm in control. Not Chad. That night, while Sentinel spiraled and Chad spammed me with texts in all caps, I slept harder than I had in years. On my nightstand, under the soft glow of a cheap lamp, sat the envelope with the embossed letterhead. My Lockheed Martin offer. Waiting, like the next chapter of my life already had its engine running. Tuesday morning looked normal on the surface. Same burnt coffee in the break room, same half-flickering light above the elevator, same uncomfortable attempt at small talk from someone in HR who clearly didn't remember my name. But underneath all that, the building felt wrong. It was the way people moved. Too fast, too quiet, eyes flicking toward me, then away. The kind of atmosphere you get when a ship hits something underwater and the entire crew pretends they didn't feel the impact. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and for a moment just listened. You can tell a lot about an office by its sounds. Today it was frantic typing, whispered arguing behind dividers, phones ringing longer than they usually did because no one knew who was supposed to answer what. I sipped my coffee, weak, bitter, lukewarm, and waited for the second wave to hit. It didn't take long. The first sign came around 8:47 a.m., when the Operation Sync call imploded in spectacular silence. The meeting link didn't load. The slide deck everyone expected magically didn't exist. The agenda, a template I alone had kept updated, was missing from the shared drive. People sat blinking at empty screens, waiting for someone else to fix it. Someone typed in the group chat, "Where's Bob? He always sends the slides." Someone else replied, "Ask Chad." I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't enjoying this, at least not the way people think. It was more like watching a machine you've maintained for years finally reveal how fragile it really is without the person who knew every screw in gear. At 9:20 a.m., my Slack pinged. Chad, Bob, can you send today's briefing slides ASAP? Chad, need them urgently. Chad, are you online? I took another sip of coffee and opened a browser tab to read an article about zero-trust architecture. Across the room, a junior engineer waved frantically at someone from finance. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. Their expressions told the whole story. The payment to our encrypted storage vendor had bounced again. If you've ever heard a grown adult whisper, "We might be in breach of contract," you don't forget it. Their faces had that colorless look of people who suddenly grasp the size of the hole they've fallen into. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for. The slam of Chad's office door. He stomped across the room like a man trying to outrun smoke. His Bluetooth earpiece blinked. His phone buzzed nonstop. His jaw was locked tight enough to crack teeth. He didn't even look at me at first. He aimed his frustration toward poor Ashley, who stood beside her desk with her oat milk latte, staring at her monitor like it had personally insulted her. I overheard her telling someone on the phone, "I don't get why my computer keeps asking for authentication. Like, I logged in once today. Isn't that enough?" I almost choked on my coffee. Authentication. For a defense contractor. That alone should have been a warning sign for any sane management team, but not ours. Around 10:15, everything fell apart at once. Accounting sent out an email marked high priority. Payment authorization failure, vendor threatening suspension. The message chain quickly ballooned to 33 replies, half of them asking the same question. Does anyone know how the old authorization hash was generated? I did. Of course I did. I created it. 3 years ago. I'd been telling leadership for months that the ERP system was outdated and the authorization keys were too fragile. But like always, they said documentation was too time-consuming, and upgrades were not in this quarter's budget. I didn't sabotage that system. I just stopped being the one-man patch keeping it alive. Half an hour later, I heard footsteps approaching my cubicle. Not the frantic, sloppy steps of someone panicking. Slow, steady ones. It was Rodriguez, good kid, Navy background like me. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there with a quiet resignation in his eyes. Finally, he said, "Boss, SharePoint's locked us out of the documentation folders. We can't access any of the Pentagon project files." I already knew why. Those folders were tied into the same multi-factor system that synced with DoD clearances. "What did you tell them?" I asked. He shook his head. "I didn't say your name. Just told them the folder is behaving exactly the way it was designed to." "Smart kid." He lowered his voice. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've been in years." He gave a faint smile, the kind you give when you respect someone too much to pretend everything is fine, and walked away. At 11:30, another figure appeared. Paul Stevens, our senior project manager. He held a folder to his chest the way people hold documents when they're deciding whether it's safer to hand them over or burn them. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Pentagon wants the final compliance documentation for the security upgrade. Legal hasn't reviewed it. Do you know where it is?" I didn't look away from my screen. "Same place it's always been," I said calmly. "Between Chad's job description and not my department anymore." Paul closed his eyes, absorbing that. When he opened them again, he just nodded. Quiet understanding. Military people recognize when a chain of command has shattered beyond repair. By lunchtime, the entire office felt like a submarine taking on water. People were scrambling for life jackets they didn't know how to use. My screen lit up with Slack messages, voicemails, emails. More than I had seen in months. A business development intern cried in the supply closet over a printer authentication error. Someone shouted across the room about losing access to the network monitoring dashboard. Finance complained that every workaround they tried led to another locked door. And through all this noise, I sat there reading a research paper titled "The Future of Defense Cybersecurity." An hour later, a new message arrived in my inbox. Subject: Compliance Review, Final Signature Required. It was from Colonel Hayes. Her tone was crisp, efficient, and terrifying in its simplicity. The Department of Defense needed my signature on the updated protocols by Friday at 1700. Without it, the project stalled. Without the project, the contract froze. Without the contract, Sentinel Defense Technologies went dark. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my personal Gmail, renamed it For Records, Timeline Evidence, and archived it. I'd learned long ago that people like Chad rewrite history the second their necks are on the line. At 2:28 p.m., Chad finally cracked. He rushed toward my desk holding his phone, face blotchy with panic. He tried to look casual, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He said, "Hey Bob, quick thing. Colonel Hayes says you still need to sign off on the audit. Should take you just a couple minutes. Real simple stuff." I looked up slowly. "I'm off that workflow," I reminded him. His eyes twitched. "Right, but legally you're still the authorized signatory. So if you could just give it a quick review, we'd all really appreciate it." I lifted a hand. Not aggressive. Just final. My work hours end at 6, I said. You'll get what you get before then. He swallowed that like a man forced to chew gravel. He hovered awkwardly, then backed away, clutching his phone like a life preserver. I didn't watch him leave. Instead, I opened my calendar and added a new event for the following morning. Oral health personal appointment. Blocked off. 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Description: do not schedule meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me. They told me I wasn't management material. But suddenly, my calendar had more power than the VP's entire department. Around 4:45 p.m., Colonel Hayes emailed again. Private message. Short. Measured. Just need timeline clarity. Respectfully. She didn't guilt me. Didn't pressure me. That's why I respected her. She talked like someone who understood both urgency and boundaries. I replied with one sentence. Documentation reviewed and noted. Timeline pending operational requirements. Translation: I will not save Chad. I will not break rules to cover incompetence. And I will not accept blame for things they ignored. That night, as Sentinel spiraled deeper into chaos, I lay in bed under a warm blanket. My phone buzzed non-stop on the dresser. Texts from Chad. Emails marked urgent. A voicemail that started with, "B.O.B., we need your signature right now. Do not disturb" blocked them all. And right beside my lamp, resting in a neat ivory envelope with embossed lettering, sat my Lockheed Martin offer. Waiting, untouched. A quiet, solid promise that I didn't need Sentinel. That I never had. Sleep came easily that night. Heavy, dreamless, restorative sleep. The kind I hadn't felt since my Navy days, when exhaustion finally beat anxiety. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't revenge yet. This was only the beginning. By Wednesday morning, the cracks weren't just showing. They were widening fast. You could feel it the moment the elevator doors opened. That strange, metallic taste in the air when a system is seconds away from total collapse. People were arriving earlier than usual, jackets still half on, hair unbrushed, eyes darting around like prey animals who finally realized the forest was on fire. I walked in at my normal time. Not early, not late, just normal. And that alone seemed to unsettle half the office. As I passed the glass conference room, I caught a glimpse of no fewer than 4 managers huddled over laptops, whispering with the wild, frantic look of people trying to disarm a bomb using instructions written in another language. Ashley hovered behind them holding a highlighter like it was a magic wand. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Not from Slack. I had disabled notifications for that. This was email, my personal one. It was from Lockheed Martin. Looking forward to having you on board Monday. HR will send onboarding documents shortly. I slid the phone back in my pocket, keeping my face neutral. If anyone noticed the subtle exhale that left my chest, nobody said anything. At 8:13 a.m., the first explosion hit. Not a literal explosion. Worse, a system-wide security alert. The kind that only triggers when the Pentagon's clearance database is unable to sync with a contractor's internal systems. The kind that sends red banners across every single workstation tied to classified access. People gasped. Someone said, "Oh no." Another whispered, "Is that new? Is it supposed to look like that?" It wasn't new. It wasn't supposed to look like that. And I knew exactly why it happened. The sync routines I wrote, individually by hand, over 3 months were designed to function seamlessly so long as leadership didn't mess with the scheduling or access hierarchy. Guess what leadership did last week? Yep, they streamlined it. At 8:20, a voice behind me whispered, "Bob, can you look at something?" I turned and saw Taylor standing a few feet away, looking like someone had just told him the ship was sinking and the lifeboats were decorative. He held a laptop in his hands as if it were a wounded bird. I waved him over. He leaned closer, speaking in a low tone. "I know you've pulled back," he said. "I get it. I really do. But if the clearance sync fails again, they'll escalate this to the DoD security office. That means investigators. That means paperwork. Hours of it. He wasn't asking for me to save the company. He was asking for me to save him from drowning under bureaucracy. I took the laptop from him, looked at the screen for 10 seconds, and saw exactly where the failure came from. A change Chad had ordered. A change Ashley had implemented incorrectly. I closed the laptop and handed it back. "It'll clear on its own," I said. "Internal misconfiguration. Nothing worth flagging to the DoD." He nodded, relieved. "Thanks, boss." Boss. Funny how that word came naturally to everyone except the person who told me I wasn't management material. At 9:02 a.m., the second shockwave hit the office. Colonel Hayes called. Not emailed. Not messaged. Called. Her voice came through the speakerphone in Chad's office loud enough for half the floor to hear. Straightforward. Controlled. Sharp. "Mr. Wellington, as of this morning, the Department of Defense has not received your contractor's final compliance documentation. We require Mr. Mitchell's signature. Our deadline stands." Chad's voice cracked slightly. "Yes, Colonel, we're working on it." "Are you?" she asked flatly. Silence. "Because our internal logs show 3 separate attempts to reach Mr. Mitchell over the last week. None received a timely response. We also see that Mr. Mitchell was removed from the primary correspondence list." Was that intentional? Dead silence. I almost smiled. Almost. At 10:15 a.m., Chad emerged from his office looking like someone had wrung him out like a towel. He spotted me immediately and marched over with stiff, jittery steps. "Bob," he said, trying and failing to make his voice sound level. "We need a serious conversation." I didn't look up from my screen. He continued, "This is no longer about internal procedures. This is about the Pentagon questioning our operational capacity. If we don't fix this, the entire contract could." "That's not my department anymore," I said quietly. He clenched his jaw. "Legally, you are still responsible for the signature." I finally turned to face him, letting silence hang for a moment. "Then perhaps," I said, "you shouldn't have removed me from the communication chain." The color drained from his face like someone flipped a switch. He fumbled for words. "Look, I apologize if things got heated last week. I didn't mean to insult your—" "You called me not management material," I reminded him. "That was taken out of context," he insisted, sweating now. "I was under pressure. Now imagine 12 years of it," I replied. He didn't have an answer for that. At 11 a.m., my phone buzzed again. I checked it expecting more chaos. Instead, it was Emma's school sending a reminder about her weekend band recital. For a moment, the noise of the office faded away. I stared at that little notification, thinking about all the nights I'd missed things like this. Recitals, dinners, bedtime stories, all for a company that didn't even know how to run a meeting without me. By noon, the submarine was flooding. Accounting lost access to secure folders. Business development couldn't retrieve proposal templates. IT couldn't fix the certificate errors because the DoD sync was locked. Someone actually tried unplugging a secure router and plugging it back in like it was a home Wi-Fi box. I watched them do it. I honestly thought I might scream. Then, at 2:30 p.m., the calendar alert appeared. A bright red banner. All hands meeting, 3 p.m. Conference room A mandatory. Every computer, every screen, every phone. A digital summons. People groaned. Someone whispered, "We're dead." Another muttered, "I think we're getting bought out." Someone else speculated that we were losing half the engineering team. They weren't wrong. At 2:58 p.m., I walked into conference room A with a fresh cup of coffee. Not rushed. Not nervous, just steady. The room buzzed with dread. Dozens of employees, folded arms, pale faces, tight jaws. Chad stood near the front, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, hair sticking up in a way that screamed, "I haven't slept." Then the founder walked in. William Hartwell, gray suit, no tie, expression like a man who'd just learned his house was built on quicksand. He set a stack of printed documents on the table. Not a laptop, not a tablet, printed documents, and said, voice ragged, "Thank you all for joining on short notice. We have a situation. The room froze. He continued, "This morning, I received a call from the Department of Defense Contract Review Board." My heartbeat slowed. He went on, "They are questioning our ability to maintain security protocol continuity. Key documentation is missing final approval." His eyes moved around the room, slow, heavy, finally landing on me. "The Pentagon specifically requested one name," he said. A long pause. "Bob Mitchell." The air left the room. He added, "They want him personally overseeing the transition. They made that very clear." Dozens of heads turned toward me. Chad visibly flinched. Hartwell asked, "Bob, is there anything you want to add?" I set down my coffee, stood up, and for the first time in 12 years I felt completely, utterly in control. "I'm no longer assigned to DoD contracts," I said. "As of last Thursday." The room rippled with murmurs. "And as of this morning," I added, "I've accepted an offer with Lockheed Martin. I start Monday." Chad's face hit white, then green, then something between chalk and spoiled milk. I finished calmly, "6 of my engineers will be joining me." Gasps, whispers. Someone dropped a pen. I straightened my jacket. "The Pentagon values continuity," I said. "Lockheed understands that." Then I walked out of the room. Not with swagger. Not with theatrics. Just steady steps. The way a man walks when he knows he's already won. Behind me, I could hear Hartwell demanding explanations. Chad stammering. Ashley mumbling something about process alignment. People whispering my name like it was a rumor they couldn't believe. By Friday, it was official. Sentinel Defense Technologies lost their primary Pentagon contract. Chad resigned effective immediately. Ashley voluntarily transitioned to new opportunities. The board initiated an emergency audit of the entire leadership structure. Me? I sat in my new office at Lockheed, sunlight on my desk, a team that respected me, and work that finally matched my worth. Turns out I was management material. I just needed to be somewhere smart enough to recognize it. I didn't feel triumphant that Monday morning. Not in the explosive, cinematic way people imagine revenge feels. Victory wasn't a firestorm or a fist pump. It was quiet, clean, a slow exhale after holding my breath for more than a decade. Lockheed's headquarters buzzed with a different kind of energy. Focused, sharp, nobody running around pretending to be busy. Nobody using words they didn't understand to sound important. People here walked with purpose, not panic. When I arrived, the receptionist already knew my name. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Welcome aboard." Those 5 words hit harder than any insult Chad ever threw at me. I rode the elevator up to the 11th floor cybersecurity division. Bright lighting. Walls lined with framed patents and commendations. No cheesy motivational posters. No synergy diagrams. Just proof of actual work done by actual professionals. My new office was modest but well lit, with a wide window facing the city. I set my old Navy coffee mug on the desk as a kind of grounding ritual. A reminder of where I came from. A reminder that discipline, consistency, and quiet excellence had gotten me much farther than any MBA bravado ever could. At 9 a.m., Jim Crawford, the former Navy commander who had recruited me, stepped into my office. He grinned, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Good to finally have you on deck, Bob. We've been waiting for someone who actually knows what the hell they're doing." Refreshing. Brutally refreshing. He handed me a folder. Not the chaotic, wrinkled kind I used to get thrown on my desk at Sentinel. A neat, organized onboarding packet with clear timelines, expectations, responsibilities. "Pentagon's excited you're joining us," he said. "They pushed our contract request through in record time last night." I raised an eyebrow. "Last night?" He smirked. "Let's just say Sentinel made some unfortunate errors that encouraged the transition." Unfortunate errors was a polite way of saying their entire infrastructure folded in on itself like a paper tent. I didn't smile, but I won't pretend it didn't feel deserved. Around lunchtime, I took a walk through the engineering wing. That's when I saw them. 5 familiar faces waiting by the badge station. Jenkins, Rodriguez, Taylor, and 2 others. Their new Lockheed visitor tags hung around their necks like medals. Rodriguez saw me and grinned. "Boss," he said, "you weren't kidding. This place is different." Taylor added, "Feels weird walking in somewhere without hearing someone shout, 'Who broke the network?' from across the room." That made me laugh. A real laugh. The first in months. I took them to their new workspace. 6 desks arranged in a clean, functional pod. Screens already set up. Credentials already issued. Lockheed didn't treat engineers like interchangeable parts. They treated them like assets. Before I walked away, Jenkins put a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks for taking us with you," he said quietly. I shook my head. "You earned your spot here. I didn't do you a favor. I just gave you the choice nobody ever gave me." His eyes softened. "Still thanks." The gratitude stung a little, because I realized how many years we'd all been surviving instead of living. By Wednesday, the fallout from Sentinel's collapse hit the news circuits. A headline on a defense industry site read, "Private cybersecurity firm loses multi-million DoD contract after internal failures. Sources confirmed leadership misalignment caused the loss." I didn't need to read between the lines. Ashley's name disappeared from LinkedIn entirely. Chad updated his title to consultant, the corporate version of "I'm unemployed but pretending otherwise." Hartwell posted a vague message about organizational restructuring and leadership transitions. I wasn't tagged in any of it, but I didn't need to be. By Friday, I had fully adjusted to my new rhythm. No panic calls. No guilt. No waking up wondering what disaster waited in my inbox. That evening, I packed up my laptop and headed toward the parking garage. As I walked through the lobby, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, my ex-wife. "Emma says she wants you to come to her recital tomorrow. She's excited." I stared at the message for a moment, letting it settle into the quiet corners of my chest. For once, I didn't have to wonder whether a server crash would force me to miss it. I didn't have to choose between my daughter and my job. I typed back, "I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it." When I stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to set. Warm gold pouring between buildings, soft and bright. I paused for a moment, breathing it in. This wasn't revenge in the way people think. Revenge isn't destroying someone else. Revenge is reclaiming yourself. Revenge is walking away from a place that took you for granted and rising somewhere better. Revenge is proving, without saying a word, that the problem was never you. As I got into my truck, I glanced at my old badge from Sentinel lying on the passenger seat. The once important laminated card looked small now. Irrelevant. A relic of a life I no longer lived. I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, and dropped it into the glove compartment. Not thrown away. Not smashed. Just archived. A closed chapter. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up. The road ahead was open. Turns out I was management material. They just weren't the kind of organization worth managing. With the city lights beginning to glow, I pulled out of the garage and drove toward a life that finally felt like mine.